How's it going, everyone? Titanhawk here again today, and we are going to add in our two contexts needed for our Rocket League OBS overlay to be functional throughout the application. So let's go ahead and get right into it. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create our game info context, where we will be storing all of the game data that comes in per each individual update. We're going to need a context for that, so that way we don't need to pass that data from component to component. So the first thing we're going to do, we're actually going to need another model. We're going to need another custom type to represent this. So we can go ahead, go here into models. We're going to create a new folder and we're going to call it context. And then within this context folder, we are going to create a, nope, not a new folder, a new file called game info, or sorry, game context. This will make it easier to follow along and easier to understand what it will be storing. So we'll go ahead and create that, and then this will just be export interface game context, and we will have this data as so. So what we are going to need to store here is some basic information about the game. Is it overtime? Is it a goal replay? Are we spectating anyone? Time remaining, all our players, etc., etc. So here are some of the data types that we can go ahead and store. So we can store the arena, which will be a string. If the game is OT, which we can do, you can do lowercase or uppercase. I just like to do uppercase. We'll do this as a boolean. Is replay boolean. This essentially is just, are we replaying a goal that was scored? That's what the replay is. Then we have a target string. Who are we currently spectating? No one equals the empty string. The time remaining, which will be a number. This will be in seconds as well. The winner, which will be a string. The players, which will be a object array, but instead of making it an object array, we can actually make this a US player array. If you don't remember this from the last video, we can go ahead and look in here. Essentially, this is all this data here. We can store all this data in here that we need with all this information here. We're just gonna get this from the WebSocket, so we can just immediately store this all in the player context, or excuse me, in the game context rather. We can store all this data, just immediately cross it all over into there. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to then add in our score. And what we're gonna do, I'm gonna label this as an object. And right above, actually, you know what? For this, we don't need an object. We're just going to, it'll probably just make more sense because there's only two teams. It's a blue, which is a number, and then there's orange, which is a number. And there we go. This will be our basic game context. Now that we have this added, we are good to start adding in our context that will actually represent the game. So here, if you remember, we created a context folder in a previous video. We're going to go ahead and make sure we have that selected, and then we're going to create a new file called the game info context.ts. Then inside of here, there are three things we're going to want to add. The first thing we're going to want to add is we want to create a new interface within here called the game info context model. Now I've decided to make this within this file just because this is only going to be used in here. The reason we're exporting it is just in case we decide that we need to use it elsewhere outside of this file. But to make everything super readable, that's where we're going to keep it. So this context model, we're going to have our game info, which will be of type game context. And then we are also going to need a set game info variable of new game info, which will be of a type game context. And that needs to be a void return. So this essentially is just, we are declaring that this function here, or that this model here will have this is essentially if you ever use React, this is a set state. We're going to have our game info, and then we just need a way to set that game info. So we have this here. That way then when we're using this in our components, we have a way to directly update the game info. So once we have that added in, then we can go ahead and create our default game info. So we'll do a export const, just that way we can access it outside. Default game info. This will be of type game context, and this will be a very large object here. So I've already created this out to speed up the process a little bit, to speed up the video so you don't have to watch me code here for so long. But essentially everything that we created inside of our game context here, we're going to give it a default value as such. So you can see here, we just set the arena to the empty string, OT to false, replay false, target is nobody, the time remaining is 300, winner is nobody, we don't have any players, and the score is 0-0. So once we have this, then we just have to move on to the next step, which is simply at the bottom, you export const, that way we can access this outside, game info context, and we're going to create context. And I'm not going to import this. If you see the VM option here, do not import that. And if you see that, if you don't see the React one pop up, you're going to want to go up here to the top and do import curly braces, create context from double quotes React. And then this is just a VS Code extension I have up here that just shows me what the game object is. Don't worry about that. You can only add that in if you want to. So then once we have this here, then we're going to want to say that this create context, we're going to type this actually. We want to type this to be the game info context model that we created up above. And then inside here, we want to create first the game info, which will be the default game info. And then we want a set game info, which we will say set game, which we will pass in, as just a small little brain fart there, which we will then pass in as a function that is new game info of game context. And this will just return nothing. It'd just be an empty function. We just take in a parameter that does nothing, and we put it into a function that does nothing. We go ahead and save this, and this is all we need to have our basic game info context. So the next context we are going to create is the Websocket Service context. But before we do that, we need to go ahead and get our Websocket Service code, which we can find here going to the SOS WS Relay snippets code snippet here on the GitLabs page for the SOS Relay plugin and everything. I'll put a link to this down below in the description, but this code is quite a little bit complex if you have not interacted with WebSockets before, so you don't need to worry about it. Essentially, this is going to handle all of our interfacing with our WebSocket, so that way we can create custom subscribe functions to successfully store read-in data, modify the data as we need, all that stuff there. So we can go ahead and essentially just copy and paste this into our code. Again, I'll put a link to this down below in the description. Shout out to Simple AOB as they created this code, so big shout out to them, as this is vital to making sure the overlay runs without problems. So now that we're back here in VS Code, the next thing we're going to want to do is want to go inside of our services folder, which should be empty, and we're going to create a WebSocket Service.js. Now you want to make sure this is a JavaScript file instead of a TypeScript file, simply because the file that we're going to, or the code that we're going to be moving in here from the SOS WS Relay code snippet that we're going to be moving in, that does not have any types associated with it. That's just a JavaScript file, which is absolutely fine. So we can go ahead and just copy all that code and we paste it inside here. The one thing I would want to make sure that you double check is the following up here. So this is not going to be called WebSocket Service for you. This is just going to be called something else. Let me double check. This is just going to be called WS Subscribers. You can keep it as WS Subscribers if you want. I just rename it to WebSocket Service as it's easier to read. Then the other thing you're going to want to do is add in an export here at the top. That way we can access this in other files. And finally, the last thing we need to do to create our WebSocket context is just go ahead and into our context folder, create a new context called WebSocket Context.ts. We can type this one. And then what we're going to want to do is just we'll move this down a couple lines because we're going to need to import a couple things. Export const WebSocket Context is going to be create context. Again, don't import that. That's VM. That's not the one we want. We'll import the React one in a second. And then this is just going to be WebSocket Service, which is just stored here. press enter, that'll import that. And then lastly, import create context from React. Again, this is just a custom VS Code plugin that I have, so you don't need to worry about the numbers not showing up for you. So this is actually all we're going to need to do for our context, and then the application is ready to go. So in the next video, we're going to add in a couple services before we begin coding and creating any of the components that we're going to be needing to create a successful overlay. So if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like down below and be sure to subscribe and turn on that notification bell. That way you don't miss out when I upload a new video to this series. Also, feel free to ask any questions in the comments section down below, and I will try to answer them in a timely manner. Until then, my name is TitanHawk17, wishing you a fantastic rest of your day wherever you may be.